The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our guest today is Jane Resh Thomas, author of children's books and book critic. She'll be talking about her latest book, Lights on the River, and discussing other issues related to children's literature. Well, Jane, it's a pleasure to have you here on All About Kids today, and we've talked often over the years about your books and also about children's literature, and have agreed and disagreed, and you're a columnist, a critic for children's literature in the Star Tribune, and have wonderful opinions about children's books. So
opinions, at least.
Well, let's talk about everything in this half hour today. First of all, you started out as an author, I think, after having loved children's books, children's literature, and one of the first books I remember you writing was Elizabeth Catches a Fish, and that was back before a lot of authors were looking at girls in more active roles, girls who could do the kinds of things that boys were always doing in books.
Well, that book, like others, was publishable because of changes in children's book publishing. Sometimes people think that writers write their stories because in order to fit the market, but that's not true for me. That book, like Lights on the River, became publishable because of changes in the editorial perspective. They suddenly discovered girls. They discovered girls without aprons, mothers without aprons, and girls actually doing things instead of standing around applauding the boys. And similarly, Lights on the River was publishable. It was a story I've always had in my mind, but it wouldn't have been publishable 20 years ago because a publisher wouldn't have thought of issuing a book about that's partly about pain in a picture book form, and partly about social issue, although that's not all that it's about, and that's not why I wrote it.
Well, Lights on the River is a book published in 1994. Hyperion is your publisher, and when I read it, my first impression was, this is a wonderful family story.
Yes.
This is about a loving, close-knit family that
Thank you.
does things together. And the family that you write about is a family that you observed when you were in Michigan years ago, a migrant worker family, a Chicano Latino family, following the harvest. And in this book, you have the older sister who is the child care provider while her parents are working in the field. She remembers with great fondness, nostalgia, a few months before when she'd been back home in Mexico with her abuela and the Christmas ceremony, the tradition. This is a family that has very little. And without being didactic or politically correct, you show children, I think, that this was a hard life, but this is a family that's sticking together. This is a family that's sharing what they do have.
Thank you for reading it perceptively. It's not about Hispanicism. It's not primarily about social issues, but the social issues necessarily come into it because of the people that it's about. It's about a family. It's about sand from a river bottom. It's about light and chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, the phrase in there about chocolate chip cookies when the child goes into the kitchen of the woman farmer and she's just taken a tray of chocolate chip cookies out of the oven, and the little girl says, it was an aroma that could have carried me on a pathway to heaven. I don't think I said it as well as you did, but it would just, I could smell chocolate chip cookies.
Thanks.
When I read that sentence. But yet it was chocolate chip cookies tinged with pain, because she looks into the very clean kitchen beyond to the bathroom where a pretty curtain was fluttering in the breeze. And when she runs back outside, back to the chicken coop, which this farmer had given her family to live in, with the outdoor toilet and the pump rather than running water, the disparity of living conditions is really brought out.
Yeah. You and I were talking a few minutes ago about the Little House books. I was going to say that it's possible today, as it did not used to be possible, to write about the whole of life, both the pain and the joy of life, to present a whole and not try to present life as if it were all sweetness and light.
Don't you think that's something that adults, we as a librarian, I read articles and I hear people saying, but children are precious. Children have this small window of idyllic time when we shouldn't be bothering them with social concerns. And as a librarian, as a parent, I see the children, I work with the children in my family faced with all kinds of terrible reality on television, in their own schools. And why have adults always thought that literature shouldn't reflect the reality? People seem to lack the understanding that literature helps you understand reality. At least that's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, about the Little House books, I was just thinking as you were talking that I think Mary had scarlet fever. Do you remember? I think she had scarlet fever and was blind afterward. The sister of Laura in the Little House books. So I'm not saying that it was impossible to make a whole world in the old days, but I think it's more possible now. They wouldn't publish a book about death of a pet until Margaret Wise Brown brought out the dead bird. I think the title of it is.
And that was in the late 50s or the early 60s.
Yeah, long.
And even books like that were controversial.
Yes.
10th Good Thing About Barney, which was about the death of a pet dog. And yet families come to the library and they want books to help their children understand death.
This book couldn't have been published when I was a child, about the death of a grandparent. Saying Goodbye to Grandma is about, it's written from the perspective of a 5-year-old about the death of her grandmother. But once again, it's not, people tell me this is a sad book, but then other people tell me this is not only a sad book, this is a joyous book. And I think that's the way life is.
The kind of book that for a family who's going to be going to a funeral, going to a wake or a reviewal, the young child experiences all the emotions that families experience, the memories of the grandmother, watching the adults in her family grieve, her grandfather crying, the fun at the wake when she and her older cousins are in the room, the coffin display room. And it's not macabre, it's a wonderful release of emotion in the fact that the adults understand that these kids have to go in and play capture the flag. Darting around, I think it demystifies a lot of what children are afraid of about death and dying, and it brings that whole, again, the connection of family, the sharing of memories, the warmth, the love of the community. The grandmother in this book had been very active in the community and in her church, and the community reciprocated at the time of her death by sharing flowers and food with the family. Just like to me it's a very Midwestern book, Jane. I think you capture, even though the funeral takes place in Florida, you capture.
In Florida?
I thought it was Florida.
No. I'm interested in that. I wonder why. What
Maybe
detail?
because they're on the dock.
Oh, it's in Michigan.
In Michigan.
I'm
okay.
imagining Michigan,
all right.
where I grew up.
But it is, so that is.
And the coffin display room is a detail from, it's an autobiographical detail. The story isn't about me and my family, but it comes from experiences in my family. Now, you were talking a minute ago about the view that children ought to be protected from knowledge of the underside of life, as Charles Krauthammer puts it in Time magazine in, I think in March
of 95.
In his column, he says that children live in a tooth fairy world, and it's wrong. He almost talks as if it's a crime against them to unsettle their innocence. When they think life is all pudding. And he cites a number of stories that he thinks do this. One of them is the Caldecott Medal book, Smoky Night. Another is Let the Celebrations Begin. About these two books are about the LA riots and the concentration camps. Let the Celebrations Begin is set in a concentration camp. The fact is that there are children whose grandparents have tattoos on their forearms because they were in the concentration camps. And if we keep this underside of life a secret, if we think we're keeping it a secret, in the first place we're deluding ourselves. And in the second place, we're making it impossible for children to talk about what troubles them.
As though if you have fears or problems, you can't discuss it with adults because
Yes.
you don't want adults to think that you're worried about something.
Yeah, you don't want to upset your mother, make her think that you're melancholic by bringing up these subjects. But I very clearly remember World War II. I was 9 the day the Japanese surrendered. It was my birthday. It wrecked my birthday party. That was a very important loss to me. But my mother said nobody would come because so she canceled the birthday party.
There was a bigger
because there was a
celebration
bigger
going on.
celebration going on in the country. But I remember the stories about the Japanese atrocities. I remember the dropping of the atomic bombs in Japan. I remember reading stories fairly early in the war about the Japanese soldiers decapitating American soldiers.
So you were seeing all this in the newspaper, you're probably hearing it on the radio, but there were no children's books that
Yes.
helped you understand that. Very few books were written during World War II which discussed it. I think Marie McSwiggan's Snow Treasure, which again is just a real good adventure story, not delving into some of the issues.
But one of the great reads of my childhood, I still remember reading that book and then loving it. The children were heroes. They sledded, I think it was the Norwegian national treasure, out under the gold bricks under the Nazis' noses. I did understand.
But that book didn't get so much into the politics of it.
Yeah,
And
not politics.
There was the children. I think instinctively we all knew as readers they were going to be safe, and it's not like some of the books now where children. The pain that you referred to earlier is brought out in literature now, and it wasn't so much.
I don't think
before.
I knew they were going to be safe. They were sledding past SS troopers. They were being watched, and there was a possibility of discovery. I liked the book partly because of the danger, but as you say. We were aware of what was going on. The adults around us thought what was going on was above us, beyond us, that we didn't hear what they were saying, what they were whispering. I thought my father was going to be drafted because I heard my family whispering about it. Children know. And furthermore, I think that although we need to protect children from the evil of the world, that knowledge of evil of the world is itself protection. And it's a good thing for the world to be opened up for us to respect our children, respect their intelligence and their ability to sort things out with us.
And again, respect the authors who write and illustrate books. I think often people look at a book like Lights on the River, which is what we would in the trade would say picture book format. This, like Smoky Nights and Let the Celebrations Begin, is not necessarily a book for a 2 or a 3 or a 4-year-old. Books with beautiful illustrations can be enjoyed by people of all ages. And I know teachers who use books like Lights on the River, and Let the Celebrations Begin to initiate discussion of issues in their classroom. And I think that the integrity of the text and the illustration contributes to a greater understanding of issues. So not to think of them just as, once a child gets into first grade, they don't look at books with lavish illustrations.
I wish the library would have shelves of books that are for both children and adults, because I think many adults would enjoy picture books now. They don't realize how they have changed. They're not all about inane kitties and bunnies. Yes, if I were a high school teacher, I would read with my history students Let the Celebrations Begin before we read The Diary of Anne Frank, because I think that it would be an introduction to what happened, to the reason that the Frank family were hiding. It would be a quick entry into the subject, and I think it would supplement history texts.
Well, and it makes things real when you observe the children in that. Even though they are in a concentration camp, the adults want to give the children something fun, something to remember, and the fact that they worked together and scraped together to make a few gifts, that there was some hope, there was some joy.
It's hope. Lights on the River is what I saw when I was a child was a family living in a chicken coop on a farm in Michigan. Later, I saw it was the chicken coop owned by the farmer who was living in the house. Later, when I was a young emergency room nurse, I took care of a child who had slashed the tendons in her wrist on a tuna fish can, which the translator told me was her only toy. These people have haunted the back of my mind ever since. But this sort of experience isn't past. At this very time, we have people living in such conditions in Minnesota, and because they're itinerant, because they come among us briefly and then leave and go to some other horrible situation, we don't become aware of them.
And yet you've dedicated your book to people, the workers. I thought that was quite, for people who lived in the chicken coop and all of the other workers who labor in the fields and orchards.
Including the farmers who own the farms. It
sounded almost like a psalm or a prayer.
I have had calls from people in Florida. A woman called recently with a Spanish accent who told me that she's been working for 12 years among the migrant workers in Florida and thanked me for writing this book. She said, I got it right. I got the culture right. I understood the anger that these people do feel. I'm hearing this as the book becomes known among people who live this kind of life, and people who who help those people. But I'm hearing from a lot of white liberals that I shouldn't have written this book because I'm not Latino, which.
Well, that's one of the dilemmas I think we face today as librarians, as authors, as parents. What's your opinion of that?
Well, it's the ghettoization of children's literature.
That only a woman can write about a girl, only a man can
You have to
write
be
about
tubercular
a boy.
to write about Keats. You have to be blind to write about Milton.
Now, your illustrator, Dooling.
Michael Dooling.
I don't believe.
I have
is
not inspected his
Latino.
pedigree.
But
the
illustrations obviously reflect the culture, the ethnic heritage and background of the family that you're talking about.
For all I
Teresa
know, Michael
and Lively.
Dooling's mother's name was Mendoza. I don't know. I didn't inquire, but I do know that he went to a peach orchard and took photographs, and he found a Latino family in New Jersey whose grandmother, who is the abuela in these pictures. Let's see, where is she? Had herself been a migrant worker in childhood. There she is.
Yes.
And he photographed the whole family. He took care to be respectful of the origin of the characters in the book. I think that's what's important. Anyone would be a fool to write a book. Anyone would be a fool or a hack to write a book about a culture she knew nothing about, just because it was a marketable book, she thought. It probably wouldn't end up being marketable because it would be false if she did it just for money. But the author has a duty to know the characters she's writing about.
Well, you do. You know Teresa so well, and here is this child who is obviously very observant. She speaks English very well, and she sees her mother refusing to speak English to the farmer, and yet she knows her mother speaks English almost as well as she does, and she realizes that her mother is angry because of the way they're being treated, but can't afford to alienate or make the woman farmer angry. So you have a very observant child who is
And an observant reader.
and she's also a very secure child. She's not complaining. I mean, she doesn't like the idea of not having an indoor toilet. But the one scene in the book that interested me, the family is exhausted. They're coming back from a long day in the fields. They're anxious to get home and have their dinner. And some bright, helpful young do-gooder says, "Oh, won't you come to the concert at the school tonight?" And I think it's Teresa's father who very politely says, "Well, we'll see. We're very tired." And Teresa's a child. She's interested. She'd like to go. And yet her family just says, "No, we'll stay here at home." And her father plays his guitar and they sing rather than going back to the school.
For a tuxedoed musician to play to them. They entertain themselves. They've traveled all night and then worked all day, and they don't have the wherewithal to go to a concert. I would like it if the readers of my books would judge the book and the authenticity of the characters and not the ethnicity of the author.
I think you've been speaking. You've been asked to be on panels with Chicano Latino peoples discussing this book. So obviously, if the communities of color themselves give you the respect, the credibility that your book deserves, it seems to me that the broader community needs to respect that as well.
There's not a lot of criticism, but some. And it's not only my book that it's happening to, because children's literature has become a political arena.
Well, it has. And do you think then that authors are becoming more concerned? You sit down to write and think, dare I, dare I not? What will be?
You know there's a possibility you'll be pilloried either by Charles Krauthammer on the right or by my liberal friends on the left. You know, there's a possibility, and who wants to go into the lion's mouth? But
except if you get the phone call from the person saying, this is real, this is the way it was, you've done it, you've expressed it.
You write the stories you're given and hope for the best.
Jane, you are a courageous author. We didn't even talk about Come Back Dog and Fox in a Trap, which are books that you wrote before, again about a boy, a sensitive boy, a boy who wants to nurture and who deals with issues of the death of a pet and getting a new pet. In this book,
Nobody ever criticized me for writing about a boy.
It's a boy and a
although
dog.
I've never been one.
It's a universal experience, I think, in these books. I remember hearing you a long time ago when I think Fox in a Trap came out, talking about your personality being sort of goody-baddie, and in these books you explored your feelings of fascination, for instance, with trapping, but yet empathy and sympathy for the animals.
You don't do that intentionally, by the way. This exploration is unconscious. You would prefer to avoid it. But people who write fiction, whether it's fiction for adults or fiction for children, if they write from their heart, are dealing with their own psychology necessarily, and they may not even know how they're doing that. When I wrote The Princess in the Pigpen, I was astonished to realize I thought it had nothing to do with my life. For once, I've written something that has no autobiographical sources. It turns out that without my realizing it, it is about me. But I didn't know how until months after the book was published, maybe a year after the book was published, when I was talking about it with a friend. It was flabbergasting.
So authors continually find themselves in their books even after.
They don't want to, but they do.
They do. You are a very honest woman, Jane. It's refreshing to have you on this program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I certainly look forward to what I know will come in the future, and as I look forward to your weekly column in the Star Tribune.
There are 6 more books coming. 6. One is a biography of Elizabeth I.
And I'd be interested to talk to you about how that relates to your life.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Thank you, Jane. It was a pleasure to talk to Jane Resh Thomas today. Her commitment to children's literature, her respect for the children and the adults who read that literature, as well as her fine writing, make her an asset to the Minnesota literary community. Thanks to all of you for joining us in All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.